Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Thank you. My name is Ben Quillian, and I'm the Associate Vice President for Information Technology, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to our 8th Annual CSUN Technology Fair. We're very pleased, as we've had in past years, to have such a wonderful cross-section from our campus community, and we've got representatives from all of the divisions and several of the auxiliaries. So we really appreciate your participation, and it's only because of that that this event is meaningful. So thank you again for joining us. We're also very pleased today to be joined by 9 of our campus technology vendors, and I'll just acknowledge them. Box, Canvas, Dell, EAB, HP, Lynda, Microsoft, SHI, and Zoom. And if you haven't had a chance to stop by and learn about their services, I'd certainly encourage you to do that during lunch or after the end of the program. So just join me in thanking them for their participation today. And last but not least, it always takes a group of enthusiastic and dedicated staff to help pull all the logistics together for an event like this. And I just want to thank them. I apologize, it's kind of a long list. It sounds like I'm reading off the Grammys, but I'll do it as quickly as I can here. So I want to thank Marla Joseph, Bori Hong, Topi Rodriguez, Celine Valenzuela, Keith Holland, Stacy Jones, Dominic Little, Tina Reed, Ben Louie, Mitch Penner, and several of our wonderful students who have helped so much, Cheyenne Milliner, Kristen Jones, Serena Nungary, and Marilyn Cuozo. So please join me in giving them a hand. So just to give a brief overview of our program, I will start off introducing our keynote speaker, and I will do that in just a second. After her presentation, we will have time for question and answer, and we will have people that can come around with microphones and allow you to ask questions. After we finish that, there will be a box lunch available right outside the doors at the back of the room, and we'll let you know when that takes place. And while you're having lunch, we'll do a raffle during that period of time, and that'll close out that portion. Then in the afternoon, we're very fortunate to be joined by Dion Zell, our Associate Vice President of Academic Technology, and she's going to present highlights on some of the work that the university has done on artificial intelligence, or AI. And she'll also talk about some of the highlights from our student competition that we had this year called AI Jam. So that's what we have planned for the next few hours. I hope you guys find it engaging, and so we will start there. So now I have the pleasure of introducing our keynote speaker. For those of you who haven't been here before, or those of you that have been here previously, you will notice that this is the first time that we are doing a presentation, a remote presentation from our keynote speaker. And so I'm very pleased that she was able to join us. We tried to sync up the schedule. She has a very busy speaking schedule, and so we were glad that she graciously agreed to present remotely today. So we're going to cross our fingers that the technology all works well, and hopefully things will go very smoothly. Rana, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, that's the first good sign. So Dr. Rana Kaliouby is the co-founder and CEO of Affectiva, the pioneer in emotion AI. She invented the company's award-winning emotion recognition technology that uses deep learning and the world's largest emotion data repository of nearly 4.5 million faces analyzed from 75 countries and amounting to more than 50 billion emotion data points. Prior to founding Affectiva, as a research scientist at the MIT Media Lab, Rana spearheaded the applications of emotion technology in a variety of fields, including mental health and autism research. Her work has appeared in numerous publications, including The New Yorker, Wired, Forbes, The New York Times, The Wall Street Journals, among many others. As a TED Talk speaker, she was named to the 2018 Thinkers 50 Radar list, and that list is comprised of management thinkers most likely to shape the future of how organizations are managed. She was recognized by Entrepreneur magazine as one of the 7 most powerful women to watch in 2014. She was inducted into the Women in Engineering Hall of Fame and won the Smithsonian American Ingenuity Award for Technology. Rana holds a bachelor's and a master's degree in computer science from the American University in Cairo, and she has her PhD from the Computer Laboratory in the University of Cambridge. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Rana Kaliouby.
Hi, good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be presenting today, and I wish I could be there in person. I'm all about emotions, so I definitely want to make this as interactive as possible. So I will be looking out for your laughs and your different emotional expressions. So please be as expressive as if I was there in person. So I've spent my entire career thinking about emotions and emotional intelligence, especially in an increasingly digital world. And I just wanted to share with you my journey through kind of building emotional intelligence in machines and some of the applications, with a particular focus on applications in education. So our emotions influence every aspect of our lives, everything from our health and well-being, how stressed we are, to how we learn and how we make decisions, and ultimately how we connect and communicate with one another. We've all been in experiences where we felt that we had this connection with a person, or we felt that there was really no connection at all, and that really affects everything from how we, how likable we're perceived to how we actually persuade people. So people who have higher emotional intelligences or emotional quotients, EQ, tend to do better in life. They are more likable, they're more persuasive, they do better at work, they're able to motivate people better. And so EQ is a very important component of our intelligence as humans. And we argue that this is the same for technology. So we live in a world that is full of hyper-connected devices and advanced AI systems that are increasingly designed to be conversational and perceptual and even relational. Yet, if you look at examples of technology around us, these devices have high IQ, high cognitive intelligence, but really no emotional intelligence. So emotions are missing in the digital world, and it's really hurting our EQs as we increasingly connect and communicate in an online digital world. And so I've spent my entire career asking this question, what if machines could understand human emotions just as we do with each other? A little bit about myself. I grew up in the Middle East. I am originally from Egypt, and then my parents moved to Kuwait. So we were there. This is the only picture, the first and last time I smoked a cigarette. I like to joke. And we were there during the first Gulf War before we had to evacuate Kuwait and went back to Cairo. I studied computer science as an undergraduate and was really drawn into how technology changes how we connect and communicate with one another as humans, right? And so I kept taking all these human-computer interface classes and just kind of was just intrigued by how technology changes the way we communicate. From then on, I moved to Cambridge University. It was my first experience living abroad, away from my family. I was actually a young bride at the time. And I realized two things. So first, when I got to Cambridge, I was spending more hours with my computer. This was in the year 2000, so it was before our smartphones. But still, I was spending more time in front of that device than I was spending any time with any other human being. Which is sad, but I think I'm not alone. And so, there were times when I'd be super stressed and I would, be working on a tight deadline, and this machine, even though it knew lots of things about me, it knew what I was doing, it knew who I was, it knew where I was, it had absolutely no clue how I was feeling. At the same time, it was my main portal of communication to my family back home, right? I was using, messaging apps and whatnot. And I realized there were times when I would actually be kind of really upset or homesick and sometimes even in tears. And the only thing I could use to communicate that back home was a sad emoticon. This is even fancy looking compared to what we used back in the day. And so that got me thinking, what if technology could identify emotions just as humans can? How could we do that? What if an algorithm or a computer could tell the difference between a smile and a smirk? which, both involve the mouth region, but they have very, very different meanings. One is very positive and the other is quite negative. Or the difference between laughter and frustration. A lot of that comes very naturally to most of us, but kind of trying to teach a computer to do that is not easy. It's a pretty complex, the way we infer other people's emotions and mental states is a pretty complex process. So I had to dive deep into the science of emotions and how do we do that. But I started wondering, what if learning apps could detect the emotional engagement of students and adapt content accordingly? As educators, you know that is often the difference between a successful learning experience and one that's not. It's this amazing teacher who's really clued in to the emotional engagement of his or her students and can adapt accordingly. What if doctors could objectively measure how we're feeling the way they measure other vital signs? When you walk into a doctor's office today, they don't ask you what your blood pressure is. They just measure it. They don't ask you what your temperature is. They just measure it. Yet when it comes to mental health, the gold standard is still kind of on a scale from 1 to 10, how depressed are you, or how suicidal are you, or how much pain are you in? And we absolutely, and we're in a dire need for more objective measures of mental health. And then what if virtual assistants understood that we were frustrated and responded appropriately? Quick raise of hands, how many people have an Alexa at home or a Google Home device? I see a few hands going up. Yep. Yeah. And so how many times, sometimes we have one at home and sometimes we'll be having dinner together and we're not even talking to Alexa and she'll just chime into the conversation. We're but we weren't even calling on you. Or, you ask Alexa to do something and she gets it wrong the first time, she gets it wrong the second time, the third time, and it's pretty frustrating. But she's completely oblivious to that, right? She does not really have an understanding of how frustrating or delightful she can be. And then eventually, what if every device in the Internet of Things had an emotion chip that could personalize and make personalized suggestions based on your mood? My favorite example there is, imagine if, I walk up to my fridge and it senses that I'm stressed because of an upcoming crazy travel schedule, and I'm about to binge eat, which I do, and it says, nope, you're not having that extra tub of Ben & Jerry's ice cream, and it locks down. That's perhaps a little extreme, but you can imagine how these devices could become more intuitive around making suggestions that are context specific and that, acknowledge our different emotional states. And this is perhaps the killer app for emotion technology. Rosie the robot.
He'll come through that door any second, Rosie, and I want him to get a nice impression of you. Yes, ma'am. You're on your own.
Hello, dear. Oh, my aching back. I've got that compact source of cramp. Oh, thanks. Oh, that feels good.
Hard day at the button, dear.
Oh, brutal. Brutal. I had to push the button on and off 5 times. That basically is a slave drive.
Yeah, so a massage robot, I think, is a massage social robot is probably the killer app for this technology. All right, so how do you build computers that can read human emotions? And I think of emotions in the broadest sense. It could be emotional states like happy and sad and surprised, but also cognitive states like, are you confused? Are you excited? Are you nervous? And many more that I'll be talking about throughout this presentation. So the way humans do this is we take a multimodal approach, and it's highly complex. If you look at how humans infer other people's emotions, 55% is in the facial expressions and gestures. 38% of the signal is in how you say the words. It's how fast you're speaking, how much energy there is, the pitch. And then only 7% is in the actual choice of words we use. So the entire industry of sentiment analysis, or when we're just communicating via email or Slack, we are just focused on the 7%. And the 93% of our nonverbal nuances is lost in cyberspace. So we're about that 93%. Like, how can we capture all these facial expressions and nuanced things that we say through our face and our voice that allows us to kind of really understand not what people are saying, right? But it's like it's almost like what they're not saying. In my career, I focused on the face. As I don't know if you can tell that, but I'm very expressive, and I've since I was really young, I've always been like really focused on like, okay, who has a crush on who based on the exchange of eye contacts and different facial expressions. And so I did, dove deep into the science of facial emotions, and it's been around for over 200 years. It started with this guy called Duchenne, and he would electrically stimulate the different facial muscles to kind of map the different facial muscles to expressions. Thankfully, we do not do that anymore. And then about 200 years ago, Charles Darwin wrote a seminal book called The Expression of Emotions in Man and Animals. And it's really an amazing photographic book of all these different people expressing different emotions. And he tries to catalog everything from happiness and surprise to, again, anxiety and confusion. And then in the late 1970s, Paul Ekman and his team at USC built a coding system for mapping the different facial muscles to a code. He calls it an action unit code. So for instance, action unit 12, which is the zygomatic muscle, when we pull that upwards and outwards, that's a smile expression. You can all try it. And so that maps into a smile. The corrugator muscle, which is the brow furrow, that's like, the brow furrow expression, and it's often a negative expression. So he built that manual. It takes about 100 hours of studying to become a certified face reader or fax coder. And then it takes you about 5 minutes to code a minute of video. So if you wanted to watch a person's video and kind of say, oh, they smile here, or they brow furrow here, or they look surprised there, it takes you about 5 minutes to code 1 minute of video. And the way you do it is you play the video in slow motion and kind of try to see what's going on in the face. Very, very laborious and not scalable at all. So what we've done at Affectiva, my company, and before that as part of my PhD work, is we use computer vision and machine learning to automate that process. I'll tell you a little bit about it, but first, we're going to attempt for the first time ever a live demo while I'm remote. So I will hand it over to Ryan, who has an iPad with the camera in it, and we're going to try and solicit a volunteer who would be up for trying this out.
Sure. So you should be able to see the iPad, Rana?
Yes.
All right. So do we have a volunteer that would like to come up and kind of try out this facial recognition?
I can tell you we're not recording any of the data. It's all on the device, and there's so I'm not going to be tweeting this or sending it to Facebook or whatever.
All right. So we've got somebody coming up here.
Ooh, great. Thank you. Hi. All right, so I can't hear what you're saying, but can I get your name?
My name's Hannah. My name is Hannah, yes.
Hi, Hannah.
Hi.
Awesome. Okay, so if you can hold the iPad in your hands. Awesome. And then give me your best poker face, because you have a wonderful smile. Yes. Okay, so first it's identified Hannah as female based on how she looks, and you're wearing glasses, so you can see that little, glasses are fine. They work just fine. So you can see that it's recognized that, and it's never seen you before, but it was able to lock onto the main feature points of your face, like your mouth, your nose, and your eyebrows. So now let's test the computer. So let's start with a smile. See if you can get you have an awesome big smile, so it fires at 100%, which is great. Let's try surprise next. Let's see if you can. That's a great surprise expression. Awesome. Can you look angry? I don't know that you're convincingly looking angry. It's hard to do this on the spot. I get it. Let's try a brow furrow. Yeah, there we go. And actually, you got an amazing angry expression there. There you go. Disgust? You look disgusted? Yeah. All right, and the final one is a lip pucker, which I like to call like the Kardashian face. Oh, yeah. Perfect. The Kardashian duck face. Perfect. Great, so these are like 6 of the 20 different expressions and 8 emotion states that it's able to recognize. Let's do one more, maybe wink. Try it again. It's hard. Yeah, you're getting it. Or maybe blow a kiss. Okay, or stick your tongue out. Actually, it keeps like, yeah, there you go. Awesome, thank you. Yay.
All right, Rana, go ahead and just share your presentation one more time, and then you can go ahead and continue.
Is it gonna, all right, awesome. All right, so how did we train this computer that hasn't seen Hannah before to recognize all her different expressions? And the way we do that is we use machine learning, and specifically a technique called deep learning, where we're kind of trying to mimic how the brain works, by which we're training different neurons to connect with each other. But basically the way we do this is we train it like we would educate a child. We would give it lots of examples of, say, people smiling, and then lots of examples of people brow furrowing, and lots of examples of people smirking. And the algorithm learns the things that are common between all the different smiles and all the things that are common between all the different smirks. And it quantifies that. So it could be, it's focusing maybe on things it's seen in the eyebrows or the nose, and it picks all these filters, and then it quantifies them in a deep learning network. And then it spits out a probability score for each of the different emotions. And you do that, the more data you feed it, the better it learns and the smarter it becomes. So when we first started doing this at Affectiva, it could only read 3 expressions. It could do smile, brow furrow, and surprise. And now it has 20 different expressions and 8 emotional states, and we keep adding to it. Through our partners across the world, we have actually, I was hearing the introduction, and we've actually kind of made more progress since the data in the bio. So we've collected 6.5 million faces from 87 countries around the world. You can kind of see some of the major countries. US is a major country. We do a lot of work in Asia, so a lot of India, a lot of China, a lot of Indonesia. We take a subset of that data becomes the training set, and a subset of the data becomes the test set. And the diversity of the data is very important. And I'm going to tie it back to some of the work we're doing around ethics and bias in AI. But just know that the data is really important, as an important piece of that. One of the first things we did was kind of, we've collected this data that nobody has before. And it's kind of almost an oxymoron, because we're collecting all this data about our emotions, which in the past we have not been able to quantify. So the first question we asked was, okay, what have we learned from all this data? So first of all, we kind of mapped out every dot here is an individual in our data set. It's all anonymized, and it's all opt-in. So everybody who is represented in our data set gave their consent to be included in our data set. But we kind of laid everybody out in terms of the intensity of their emotions. So the first thing we found out is that facial expressions are largely universal. A smile is a smile everywhere. But we did observe cultural differences in how people express emotions. So for instance, you can see that the Southeast Asians and the East Asians were right at the bottom left corner of this chart, right? They weren't that expressive compared to Latin Americans, who are like right up, kind of maxing out at the top right-hand corner. And so we quickly realized that there are cultural differences in terms of the intensity of the emotion, or when people choose to be forthcoming with how they're feeling. And so now we have cultural norms where we compare, like this Asian, this Japanese dude to this other Japanese dude, and not compare a Japanese individual with a Brazilian individual, because that kind of puts in consideration the different cultural norms. We also found that women are more expressive than men, which is perhaps not surprising. We found that females express more smiles, for instance, than men, both in terms of intensity, but also duration. So you can see that women spent more time smiling than men did. We did find that men, in part, the only place where men kind of showed more emotions compared to women was in the brow furrowing, which is typically associated with more expressions of anger. So we thought that was interesting. We did find the gender differences vary by culture. I always find that really interesting. So in the US, women smiled 40% more than men. In France and I believe Germany, women smiled 25% more than men. But in the UK, there was no difference between men and women, which we don't know why, but that's kind of what the data is showing us. And we continue to explore, we're looking at age differences and how people express emotion and contextual differences. Like, when do people feel more comfortable sharing their emotions versus not? But then a question that often comes up is, okay, this is all great, but how is this emotion AI really kind of disrupting and being applied in the industry? And I wanted to give you some flavors or some examples of the work we're doing. The first kind of area is around how we consume content. So we work with a third of the Fortune Global 100 companies and leading market research firms to understand how people engage with their video content. It could be a TV ad, it could be a digital ad, it could be a TV show, a movie trailer, movies. We are able to test the moment-by-moment reaction by which people respond to content. And some of this content is humorous, some of it can be sentimental. We've tested a lot of Super Bowl ads before they go live. So we see people tearing up or people looking skeptical, or often what happens is there's just a poker face because most shampoo ads and whatnot are pretty boring. And we can see that too. Often what we find is that emotions are memory markers, and and these brands want to elicit a certain emotional response through their content, but they have no idea if they've hit that right emotional chord or not. And the way they do this right now is before our technology, is they ask you after the end of the ad, like, okay, did you like this? Do you think you're going to buy the product? And it's very subject to all sorts of biases. So instead, we just collect your kind of visceral subconscious response to these contents. So I wanted to show you one of our most kind of highest emotive ads that we've tested so far. We've tested about 26,000 ads worldwide. So I'll just play the ad. I don't know if you've seen it before. It is one of my favorites. So the way we test these ads is we send surveys out on your devices and phones. We don't need to bring people into a lab because a lot of our devices have cameras on. We would send you a survey and we'd ask for your opt-in. If you said yes, we'd turn the camera on as you watch the ad, and we would collect at about 15 times a second your different facial expressions. And we would do that for hundreds of people, and we would aggregate their responses. So this is the aggregated response for, I believe, 150 people who viewed this ad. The green curve is how expressive they were, like the audience, like how emotive they were, and the blue curve is the smile response. So you can see that there are two particular areas in this ad that elicited high emotions. One is when they both had a difficulty standing up, people smiled there, and then the other part was when the viewers realized that they both got each other the same gift, which is the knee pads. This scored in the top 10% in terms of emotion response of all the ads we've tested over the last, since 2014, so over the last 4 years. And we have done separate research that kind of ties your emotional response to this content to outcomes like, propensity to buy or virality or word of mouth, etc. We've also done this for TV shows. This is a funny example. So this was actually CBS testing a sitcom, Friends with Better Lives. And this is, again, the smile curve for about 218 people. And then what they did is they superimposed the different characters on the smile curve. And then they realized that there were two particular characters that every time they showed up, they were just not funny. So you can see here they are, no smiles, here they are, no smiles, here they are, no smiles. So they actually eventually swapped them out. So that's another kind of way with which this data can be very helpful. And sometimes it's hard for people to articulate whether they liked a particular character or not, because you see the whole thing and it's hard to introspect moment by moment, which is what our technology helps do. And I want to come back to this kind of use case with online MOOCs and online learning systems, because if you have a lecture and people are watching it online, you have no idea as an educator, you don't really know how people are responding. Are they getting totally confused during a particular piece of the content? And through this type of technology, you can get a moment by moment response and kind of see, like this part, like everybody was confused here. Like maybe I should do something about this particular piece of the lecture. And then I want to play this video, like projecting into the future. Imagine if this could be responsive storytelling or responsive media that, responds based on how you're feeling.
You see, with emotionally intelligent technology, interfaces are replaced with faces. What if two people had entirely different experiences watching the same content, all based on how they felt? That's where responsive media comes in. For example, let's say a whole family loves mysteries, but dad is really grossed out by all the blood. Mom loves it. Hal likes all the romantic scenes, even though he says he doesn't. So dad's version is a little light on the blood and heavier on the comedy. Mom's is a complete bloodbath, and Hal's is a sweeping love story.
And so in that world, what if our entertainment could react to our emotions in real time? What if a story could be personalized based on how you're feeling? And I think that creates an entire new industry, really, for incorporating emotions into your digital experience.
So as a company, we spend a lot of time kind of understanding viewer and audience's response to content. But I'd say about a year ago, we started to get a ton of interest from the automotive industry. And as you may know, mobility or the automotive industry is really undergoing major disruption, and car companies are really kind of reimagining what the future of mobility will look like with robo-taxis and self-driving vehicles, etc. We know that drowsy driving causes 10% of all crashes. 9 people die every day because of distracted driving. So safety is a huge issue when it comes to mobility. And so if you imagine that there's an inward-facing camera, what if your car sensed you were drowsy and said, you know what, I think I'm actually a better driver in this case, I'm going to take over control. Or what if your rideshare experience felt safer? We are having to analyze a lot of videos where drivers lash out on the passengers, sometimes vice versa. Well, what if that, we could sense that mood in the vehicle and flag that to an Uber or a Lyft, and they could intervene somehow? What if your car detected the mood of all passengers and recommended the right content? It could be the right music, the right video content as passengers, or maybe it's adjusting the lighting or the temperature inside the vehicle. So when we started kind of moving from how people respond to content to how people behave in a car context, we wanted to know if our technology would do any good, would it even work in the context of a car? And so we started analyzing some videos. This is a car karaoke example. Actually, I'll stop it for a second. Just so that you know what to look for. If the expression is negative, it's going to be red. If it's kind of neutral, it'll be yellow/orange. And then if it's positive, it'll be green. And so you can see how it's giving you a sense of how positive or negative the discussion is going just based on based on the facial expressions.
No, it's crazy.
What's the youngest guy you've dated?
Dude, I don't know. Now, you know,
What's
they
your
have to be
colour?
legal. No, that's too young.
19.
No.
20.
I'm that kind of girl.
I'm not saying
I'm
you're
a
not.
relationship kind of girl.
I'm not saying you're not. What's the most romantic?
I'll stop that here. You can see that, you know, they're turning their heads around a lot. There's a lot of changes in the background and the lighting. And obviously they're talking at the same time. So it's a lot harder than just somebody watching, you know, a video on their phone. But we were able to track that pretty well. We took that data and then we said, okay, you know, carpool karaoke, I'm not sure that that's representative of how people look like when they're driving. And so we now send out cameras, dash cams to people, again, with their permission. We ask if we can collect data of their commutes, and for a number of them, we have permission to share it more publicly. So I'm just going to show you some examples. We've collected data in the United States as well as in Asia and Africa. And so here are some examples of the data we've seen. And again, remember, these are people who know that there's a camera in their kind of the dashboard, and they know it's collecting data. Yet, these are the kinds of behaviors we're seeing. So this dad is clearly falling asleep while he's driving. The video actually goes on for a good 10 minutes. We're just showing a few seconds, but he's clearly asleep. And you can see him fighting that, but it's, you know, obviously pretty dangerous. This is an example of somebody kind of singing along, but hands off wheels. So that's kind of, again, potentially dangerous. This woman is clearly a bit agitated as she's driving. We do, on some occasions, have the voice too, because we look at voice analytics. So combining the two could give us a better picture of what's going on. Maybe she's on a stressful phone call. We're not sure what's going on here. And this is probably my favorite of all. So this woman, let me fast forward to the part. So she has two phones in her hand. Wait, let me get to the part here. Okay, there she is. So she's got two phones and she's basically texting on the two of them. And again, hands off wheels and actually gaze off the road for prolonged periods of time. And again, we're able to detect that by looking at things like eye gaze direction, head pose, and maybe even in the future object detection, we can tell that there's a pretty highly distracted driver in this case. I just want to show you quickly this example of, oops, what happened there? This is an example of work we've done with a company called Renovo, where they took our metrics, our sensing metrics around distraction, and they baked that into a car that can alert you based on how distracted or inattentive you are, and then it escalates it. So it will first start by alerting you nicely, and if you continue to like look distracted, it will alert you again, and then eventually it will slow down the car. And if there's no response, then it will eventually stop. And it kind of begs the question, like, what's the right response from the car once it knows that the driver is drowsy or intoxicated or distracted? And we collaborate with our partners in the automotive industry to get to that right level of interference from the car. But in the future, it's not just going to be about driver monitoring. It's going to be about this robo-taxi world where travel is going to be about entertainment and productivity because we're not driving. I did a little bit of math on how many hours I spend driving myself, and it's about 30 days a year I'm spending driving in a car. So when I reclaim that time back, how do I want to use it? And there's a lot of dialogue within the automotive industry around maybe it's the perfect place to be learning, right? Which brings us to, okay, how will this kind of technology transform how we learn? And this is not an industry that we particularly focus on. It's one that I'm very passionate about. So if you have ideas on how we could partner or collaborate, or even just like really cool use cases, please do share. But I'll share with you some of the work we've done and some of our thinking in this area. So first is this idea of an asynchronous online Mooc. You've got students watching content. It's pretty much like the advertising use case, only you're not watching ads, you're watching a lecture. We know that student engagement is a lead indicator of completion, and we know that for a lot of these Mooc companies, dropout rates are really high. because by the time the student has disengaged, it's too late to intervene. But maybe if you use student engagement as a lead indicator for dropout, you can intervene at the right time, maybe get them a faculty to help, or potentially a peer, or change up the content, or what, right? There might be different strategies for how you can re-engage the student. I also think it could be very helpful as a way to provide feedback on people's learning styles. Maybe you are, as a learner, you're better off kind of consuming 10 minutes at a time as opposed to a 1 hour lecture, or maybe you're more auditory or visual. And this kind of technology can give us insight into learners' personal styles of learning, and which could be used to personalize the experience. And so the second way we could use emotion AI is to personalize the learning just the way an awesome teacher would do. And this is my daughter a few years ago. I'll show you a little bit of video. Again, I took the video with her permission. I was like, oh, do you mind if we record your kind of Khan Academy math session? And she was like, sure. And you can see that because the first question we had is, are people even going to show any expressions when they're doing math online, right? Maybe they won't, because it's not a social situation. As it turns out, there's a lot of emotions, and some of it is positive, and some of it is like here, she had gotten it. There was one example where I think she was thinking hard, got it wrong, she goofed up, and she was like, you can see an embarrassment smile. So I'll play the video. You can see her face tracked there at the bottom. Okay, gets that right. She's happy again. The green is positive. She's kind of thinking. She's pretty attentive. And then she messes up the text, and so she's like frustrated. She gets this surprise expression a little bit, and then now she's like, okay, it's pretty negative from now on. She gives it another try, gets it wrong. So there's a lot of emotions here. And again, you can see how this could be used to summarize a learner's experience, or even intervene in real time. Like if she's struggling, then you can get, an avatar or a chat bot to pop up and say, hey, do you need a little help? Like, maybe I can think through this with you. And then this is also a video from the same session. She was basically done. But I kept saying, you should keep going on, and you could see that she was done. And again, imagine if there was a system on that could measure her voice and facial analytics and determine that, okay, she's not in a state to take more of this. Sorry. Wait.
I'm done!
I'm the monster mom. So again, part of the learning experience is determining whether the learner is in a state of getting some of this content or not. And none of this, online learning systems are for the most part oblivious to all of this. But it doesn't have to be kind of an app on a laptop or a phone. It could actually be a social robot. And this is a robot that was developed at MIT. We are the emotion brain inside the robot so that it can respond to the child's learning experience. I will only play a short part of this video, but it's available online.
Hi, I'm Tega. I'm a learning companion for children. Whee! Through my small size, furry exterior, and my appealing range of physical expression, I help engage children in educational activities as a peer. Here
I love how
am
she
in the classroom.
makes eye contact
Have you
with the
put
robot.
all the blue sheets in their own pile for me? The kids love me. Hey, that's my face.
I find it really interesting how kids are very comfortable with these robots. And I also think it's quite interesting how this group at MIT designed the robot as a learning companion as opposed to a teacher. So it's more of a peer, right? And that makes for different dynamics between the learner and this robot than if it were a teacher. We found that in studies where they piloted this in an elementary school in the Boston area, that for a Spanish learning class, that kids who had the emotionally engaged robot, as opposed to kind of a robot that didn't have any of the emotions or emotional intelligence, they learned more words, and they were also just generally more engaged with the experience. And then you can imagine how this would apply for online distance learning platforms like HBX, which is Harvard Business School's online platform. It does really look like this. So you have 60 faces on screen and about 100 others that, that are on the platform, but you don't necessarily see their face. But what if you had an aggregated stream of overall emotion engagement broken down by city or by, by school or by experience? And you could use that as an instructor to optimize the experience. I'm sitting here doing this remotely, and I wish, I can't see any of you, and I'm like, but I don't know if they're engaged or not. Hopefully you are. But that would be the kind of, emotion AI data that I think would be very helpful to an instructor that's doing this remotely, either synchronously or asynchronously. And then the final example in the learning realm is, how do you improve your speaking or soft skills generally? So this is an application developed at the University of Rochester. It's called RockSpeak. And it's a platform that allows you to practice your speaking engagements or whatever. And it gives you real-time feedback on, how many times you smiled, how many times did you frown, were you poker-faced or not? Did you say like a bazillion times? And you can track your improvement over time. And I believe this is the first case where you can quantify your soft skills. Public speaking is the number one fear that people have. They fear it more than death. Right? And so that is a very non-judgmental way of practicing your speaking, your speaking skills. And it could be applied to public speaking, job interviews, maybe negotiations, maybe corporate sales training. There's a lot of empathy training for doctors. There's a lot of applications for this kind of tool. Which kind of brings us to this world where in the future we will work, live, and play alongside social robots, AI systems, and cobots, which is these collaborative robots, which will take a transition. It will require a transition from the robots' ends, like that's why we're adding emotion AI and social intelligence to these devices, but also as humans, we need to become comfortable with working alongside robots or getting robots or delegating tasks to robots. And the robot could be a learning robot, it could be, a factory robot, it could be a taxi robot. So think of robot in the broadest sense of the word. I love this picture because you can tell that the adults are pretty uncomfortable around this thing. Contrast that with my 9-year-old, Adam, who just loves robots. And a few years ago, I recorded, we filmed a documentary in his classroom. And I just wanted to show you a short segment of how these kids love robots. By the way, this is part of a documentary that just came out. It's called "Do You Trust This Computer?" It features Elon Musk, and it talks about all of the concerns around AI, but also some of the positive that can come out of AI as well.
Hey, first graders, how are you? Can I get a hug? We have kids interact with the technology. A lot of it is still in development, but it was just amazing. Who likes robots? Me! Who wants to have a robot in their house? What would you use a robot for?
I would use it to ask my mom very hard math questions.
Okay. What about you, Theo?
I would use it for scaring people.
All right, so start by smiling. Nice. Brow furrow.
My son has a lot of practice doing this.
Eyebrow raised. This generation, technology is just surrounding them all the time. So it's almost like they expect to have robots in their homes and they expect these robots to be socially intelligent. What makes robots smart?
Put them in like a math or biology class. I think you would have to train it.
That's my favorite line because he's absolutely spot on. We absolutely have to train these robots the way we do with humans. And that's the entire machine learning field, which he doesn't know much about, but he intuited it. And then perhaps the most kind of the application or the use case that I am most passionate about is how emotion AI can transform mental health. I talked about how the gold standard in mental health today is still a survey that is very unreliable and very subjective. And our data can really help with that. The very first application of this technology that I explored back at MIT before starting Affectiva was in autism. And we now have a partner, a company called BrainPower that uses Google Glass combined with our technology to help kids on the autism spectrum understand other people's social and emotional cues. And I'll show this clip.
On screen. Mom. 8-year-old Matthew Krieger has been diagnosed with autism.
A lot of the trouble he gets into with other kids is he thinks it's funny and doesn't read it at all.
Can you turn the volume up just a little bit?
Or angry.
Matthew's mother, Laura, signed him up for a clinical trial being conducted by Ned Sahin.
I want to know what's going on inside the brain of someone with autism. And it turns out parents want to know that too.
You get points for looking for a while, and then even for looking away and looking back.
Sahin's company BrainPower uses Affectiva software in programs Matthew sees through Google Glass. These games are trying to help him understand how facial expressions correspond to emotions and learn social cues.
One of the key life skills is understanding the emotions of others. Another is looking in their direction when they're speaking.
Looking at your mom, and while it's green, you're getting points. When it starts to get orange and red, you're slow down and focus.
I'm looking at you.
Just a few minutes later, the difference in Matthew's gaze overwhelmed his mother.
Why?
Just when you look at me. It makes me think we haven't really before. If you're looking at me differently.
I've definitely had similar experiences working with kids on the spectrum where after a few weeks and months of using our technology, you can get a sense, the eye gaze and the eye contact is different. And it's very powerful because this is how we connect with each other as people, right? And when that connection is broken, it's very hard. So right now they are undergoing a clinical trial. We see improvement in the short term, but the big question is, does this improvement persist beyond the actual training sessions? Another example is Erin Smith. She started working with Affectiva a few years ago while she was a junior in high school. She noticed randomly watching a news segment one night that patients with Parkinson's have different facial expressions. Their facial expressions are asymmetric and they might feel off. So she wondered if we could quantify that in a way that acts as a red flag or an early indicator for Parkinson's. So she reached out to us, we gave her access to the technology, and she partnered with Michael J. Fox's foundation and basically started a company specifically focused on early detection of mental health disorders and discovering early biomarkers for things like Parkinson's. I particularly love this example because obviously she's a high school student, very motivated, and kind of followed an intuition, right? So she is about to start college next year. And she's continuing to do this work. Another area is around depression tracking and suicide assessment. So we know that there are facial and vocal biomarkers of depression. Things like, dampened facial expressions, droopy eyelids, a lot of the upper lip raiser, which is an expression of contempt. So we see that a lot in depressed patients. So what if your phone could flag this? Every time you check your phone, it can take an emotional snapshot, and it knows your baseline because it's seen you over a long period of time, and it knows if you're deviating from that baseline, and it could flag that to yourself or to a parent or a friend or a partner or a doctor, so that people could get help sooner. Stephen Vinoy at UMass Boston, he's particularly focused on suicide assessment, and he has fascinating data around how people who are suicidal respond differently to content than to harmful video content than people who are not. And he thinks that, again, that could be used as a as an early indicator for suicidal behavior. And I guess something I think about a lot is when we start seeing more of this emotion AI technology applied in every aspect of our lives, really, does that help bring us together? Because right now we communicate on a digital platform that is focused on just that 7%, and the 93% is just not represented in our online digital communication. So we're kind of all rendered autistic in a sense. So I think about how we can redesign our social media platforms to build more empathy and bring in that EQ that we've all lost somehow in this transition to a digital era. And I will skip this example. Part of this is talking about the ethics. A lot of people are worried about the existential threat of AI in general. Like, are we going to build these robots and AI systems that are going to take over the world? We are many years away from that. That is not the thing that keeps me up at night. The thing that does, though, is as we are designing these AI systems and they're evolving so fast, we are accidentally building in and perpetuating bias that exists in our society today in these algorithms. For example, when we train our smile detector on mostly white people, when we Googled diverse faces on the internet, and these are the faces we got. And if you look closely, they're not that diverse. So if we were to use just that data to train our algorithms, they would pretty much not work, outside of this kind of skin color and this kind of look, right? And so we have data of people. I grew up in the Middle East. A lot of women there wear hijabs, so we have a lot of data with women wearing hijabs, a lot of beards. Asians have bangles, and so or bangs, hair, whatever, hair. So it's very important to have a very diverse representation of the data and sample it that way and evaluate for diversity. Data privacy is another big area that we spend a lot of time thinking about, even before the Facebook Cambridge Analytica scandal. It's one of our core values as a company. Emotions are very personal, and we know that there are use cases that kind of break people's trust. So as a company, we've stayed away from surveillance and security applications, even though we could have done well financially, but it just didn't match with our core values. And of course, impact on the workforce as well. What is interesting and exciting, again, as you are a university and you think about jobs and what will students do once they graduate, AI is creating 4 out of 5 new jobs. And it's everything from machine learning scientists to applied AI scientists, but also like data czars or data strategists. There are, writers who are creating the personalities of these robots, or graphic design. I mean, there's so many new jobs that are created because of these AI advances. And to wrap this up, we took a very strategic decision a few years ago that as a company, we wanted to enable others to take this core emotion engine and apply it in their own use case. We've had really bizarre use cases over the years. And so, my challenge to you is, what will you build with this? You can go to our website, download the SDK. For educators, it's discounted. For smaller companies, it's actually for free, and you can play with it. Thank you. And I believe we are going to open the floor up for some questions.
Thank you very much, Rana. And certainly we can give her a round of applause. She'll. And just for the audience, so Rana can see the audience through the camera here. So certainly, if you have any questions, we do have catch boxes. We'll pass those around. Maybe we'll toss them if you want to catch it. And certainly feel free to ask Rana any questions, and she'll be able to hear you through the catch box.
Dropped it. I was just curious, because machine learning systems are kind of inherently imperfect. There's a lot of data that has to go in. So how do you handle when the machine gives a result or when the system gives a result that might not necessarily be correct? So like the carpool karaoke, when he was asking a question, it showed kind of neutral and negative, even though it was definitely very much neutral. So how do you kind of handle that and approach that? And even how do you communicate that to people?
Yeah, a great question. I'm hearing a little bit of my echo. Okay, let's try again. Yeah, so that's a great question. And these algorithms are not perfect. We like to release, products or release these algorithms once they hit 90% accuracy, right? So they'll get, they'll kind of get it right 9 times out of 10. But in the cases where it gets it wrong, it depends. Like if we're aggregating many people's responses, if it gets it wrong on one person, that's not catastrophic. In the car environment, it depends on the severity of the use case. Maybe you want to err on the, it's okay if you flag it, you flag people as drowsy even though they're not drowsy, because it's safer that way. Or maybe you want to go the other way because you don't want to tell people they're drowsy every other second, right? So it's definitely a collaboration with how the data wants to be used with our partners. There's no right answer. Yeah.
Do you think that you'll be able to validate fake emotions?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. There is actually, so when people lie in general, or they are kind of deceptive in their emotions, like for instance, we can tell that through what's called microexpressions. So these are very nuanced expressions that happen over like a few milliseconds. They're usually fleeting and they're very nuanced. So at the right camera rate, like if we're sampling 30 frames a second, we are able to see these nuanced expressions. So for instance, when there's a fake smile, which just involves your mouth, or a true Duchenne smile, which also involves your eyes, and it's like the crow feet wrinkles, we can tell that. We can tell from the dynamics of the emotions, like in pain, we can tell fake pain from true pain because of how it unfolds over time and which action units and facial muscles it's activating. So you can absolutely do that. The question is, again, which applications do we feel comfortable? We get approached to do lie detection work a lot, and we have stayed, we've stayed away from that, even though the technology can do that. But maybe in a medical situation where we need to tell the difference between a fake pain expression and a true pain expression, maybe that, yeah, I can see how that could be helpful.
Hi, so I was wondering, you were talking about engagement in reading engagement as instructors in online courses, which I think is exciting. But what I've heard in the past, I don't use this myself, but like, for example, online proctoring tools during test exams that can see the student. I know that students that are especially not used to this, it's they talk about increasing their test anxiety, and they feel like it's an invasion of their privacy in their home because it's looking at them, even though they're told that the data, it's going to be just reviewed by the instructor and the TAs. So I was wondering what your thoughts are on that, especially in terms of like online courses and engagement.
Yeah, I think it is really crucial that when we design these systems that you align with the learner and it's not like portrayed as Big Brother. Because if you do that, then you lose the trust of the learner. I mean, that's not just specific to education, it's specific to other application areas as well. We found, this is work that we didn't do ourselves, this was done at USC, and actually it's this, let me go back one slide. It was this, I didn't talk about it much, where did it go? This is she's an avatar called Sensei, and she's basically a PTSD clinician. And they found at USC, they did the study where they had, PTSD patients talk to Sensei, and then PTSD patients talk to a human clinician. And they found that the patients that talked to the avatar were more forthcoming because the avatar was not judgmental. So I think if we design it right and you align it with the student, like maybe it's just giving because in the Proctor use case, the video is actually being streamed to another human at the other side, but with our technology, you don't need to do that. You just need to invoke the algorithm. It will track the face or not, or it will track your identity or not. And that's all you need. So I think it's all about the design and what value are people getting in return for giving up this, some control over their data.
Really enjoyed the talk. Some of the work that you're describing that you do for advertising reminds me of the work of Frank Luntz. I don't know if you know Frank Luntz. He uses a similar type of emotion reading technology to market test phrases like war on terror and the death tax and stuff like that. I was wondering, it brings up the issue of ethics and that this technology can potentially be used in very unethical ways. I was wondering if you think about that and if your company thinks about that in terms of the clients that you serve and so on.
Yes, we think about that a lot. You're absolutely right. So Frank Luntz he actually uses the dial, so he'll bring people in and he'll have them turn a dial, which is still quite cognitive because you have to think about whether you want to turn the dial one way or another, right? Whereas again, I would say this is just kind of technology taps into the more visceral responses that people have. So during the Obama-Romney cycle, we did a little bit of testing on our end, not on behalf of any client, but we were curious if your facial expressions could be an indicator of who you're voting for. So we recruited panelists. We had them watch the debates online from the comfort of their home on their device. And we knew nothing about them. Like we asked them on the way in, kind of their political views, and then on the way out, who they, as a survey, who would they vote for? But we built the algorithm just looking at the facial expressions, and we found that the most predictive expression was the smirk. So if you're like saying war or terror, and I say I do this, I'm like smirking, I'm not like buying it. That was the most predictive of who you were going to vote for. So you're absolutely right. There is a real use case here in terms of messaging and political positioning. And I grew up outside of this country, so I know how this data could be misused by certain politicians. So that's a tough one, right? Like in the current political climate, I don't know that I would want Affectiva to explore this use case. So it's an area that we haven't done a lot of work in, but again, I know that emotions drive decisions, and if we can capture that, that data could be very valuable. I don't know if that totally answered your question.
All right, do we have any other questions in the audience? Yeah, Celine, we've got one right here.
Thank you, Rana. This is Ben. Just curious, is there one particular emotion that you're having tremendous difficulty being able to track, and just curious what that is?
I love that question. I'd say sarcasm. Like, sarcasm is really hard. It's hard to tell from the voice. It's hard to tell from face. So that's one where I like to say that the technology is more at like toddler age. So it knows the basics, but it doesn't really do well with any advanced emotions like sarcasm or jealousy or pride. Or like, one thing I wonder about, like, what's the facial expression of inspiration? Like, what do people look like when they're inspired? We don't know any of this.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions?
One more in the back here.
Okay.
Fascinating talk, actually. This is actually really wonderful. I had a question about some of the more far-reaching possibilities for this, because I had seen another presentation on UCTV about Kindles reading your facial expressions and then being able to make recommendations for you on book purchases and things like that. And the speaker even went on to talk about this kind of technology being able to then gather so much data on you that it could be, and other individuals, that it could help you make more, let's say, informed decisions on who a potential mate could be. So we have like dating sites that you go to, and if it has a collection of data on thousands of individuals, it could take your facial expressions and all that data and then start making recommendations for you, these algorithms, on who would be a good potential mate for you, as opposed to you kind of coming to these decisions on your own.
Yeah, I think dating is the killer app for all of this. Yeah, I mean, again, like our emotional profiles really do kind of depict kind of the decisions we make, and it's everything from small decisions like autopilot decisions like what we have for breakfast to like bigger decisions like who we're going to marry or where we want to live, right? And sometimes we're not even aware of that. Like I feel like it would be helpful for me as an individual to track this data the way I track my physical fitness or other aspects of my life. Like right now, it's kind of almost a black box, and unless you take the time to reflect and are very thoughtful and mindful about your emotional wellness, it's really, right, like it's a black box. So I feel like quantifying it could be very helpful at the individual level, but it does open up all sorts of questions around you can personalize and customize all sorts of things, including, content recommendations, product recommendations, which I think, like a lot of us watch a ton of content, right? It's just that we don't like useless content that's irrelevant to us. So if it helps kind of target more relevant content to me, I think I'd be okay with that. I would want it to be very transparent about how it's doing that. So I think data privacy and transparency are really key. But again, it's all part of this bigger dialogue around, the value exchange when it comes to data. Like, what am I getting in return for giving up this data, and who has control? And that's part of a broader thread. We're part of the Partnership on AI consortium. It was started by IBM, Facebook, Microsoft, Amazon a couple of years ago. And they invited a number of startups. Our startup is one of them, but also Amnesty International and ACLU. So they're trying to bring different stakeholders in this broader issue of AI for societal good. And I'm part of the committee that's, it's called the FATE, Fair, Accountable, Transparent, and Equitable AI. And we're coming up with guidelines and best practices for companies ahead of legislation. So, I won't pretend that we know all the answers. It's unfolding in real time, but I feel strongly that I want to be a voice at the table. And also like kind of educating the public, right? That's a key part of I think how we should go about this. Like the public should really know more about this technology and the data that's, the data that's being collected.
All right. Well, if there's no other questions, let's give Rana one more round of applause.
Thank you so much for having me. And easy to find if anybody has more questions or ideas. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Rana. And we certainly appreciate you taking the time to join us and talk to us about this very exciting topic that I think we will all see in the very near future. Maybe in our own dating apps and whatever killer app comes out.
Learning apps.
Learning apps.
All right, thank you.
So thank you so much. With that said, we're going to break for lunch here in a moment. We will return at 12:15 for our next presentation, but starting at 12:05, we will do the raffle and giveaway. So if you have not gotten all of the stamps necessary and all of that, go ahead and take the time now, and then we can go ahead and proceed for lunch. Thank you.